Welcome to a Becky special worksheet on margin of error. I'll going through just some basic stuff of margin of error and confidence intervals. First thing, to be able to really understand what we're talking about, we've got to do a couple definitions. So our first thing is population. And when you talk about a population, you're talking about all the people that you could potentially choose from. So, you know, if you're thinking about, I want to do a survey of adult females. So your population would be all adult females. Well, it's going to be impossible to talk to everybody. So that's where the sample comes in. And the sample is part of the population. So while the population is everybody, the sample could be 32 adult females or 500 adult females, but it's part. So that's the big difference between population and sample. So example 1, in a survey of 1,440 adults in Indiana, 37% said they like the color blue. All right, well, the population, whenever you're thinking about population, you always should really start with the word all. Well, who are we talking about in this problem? We're talking about adults in Indiana. So the population is all adults in Indiana. All of them. So we took all the adults. Now, we couldn't talk to all of them. We could only talk to 1,440 of them. So the sample is 1,440 adults in Indiana. So you'll see the difference. When they ask for population, you shouldn't have a number. You should have all. But when you talk about a sample, you should actually have a number. So go ahead and try this one. Hit pause, try it, and then come back and see if you have the right idea on this. So in a survey of 40 students at Ivy Tech in Warsaw, 23% of them prefer math over English, as normal people would. So what's the population? Well, who are we talking about? First of all, population is all. Well, we're talking about students at Ivy Tech in Warsaw. So all students at Ivy Tech in Warsaw. And yes, you do need to be that specific, because if you just say all students, is that high school students? Is that middle school? Is that students in Alaska? No, students at Ivy Tech in Warsaw. So be specific. And now the sample, well, the sample has the numbers. So 40 students at Ivy Tech in Warsaw, right? You want to have all of that. Okay, now the thought of this, if we pick, this goes back to example 1, if we picked another group of 1,440 adults in Indiana, would we still expect that 37% of them would like blue, as we said in that last problem? Why or why not? So your answer is probably no, or maybe not necessarily. Necessarily. I think that's how it's spelled. Who knows? I'm a math teacher. Okay, so we don't expect it to always be 37%, but it's probably going to be close to that. How close? Well, I don't know. That's kind of what we're going to get into with the margin of error type of a dealio. So when you pick a decent size, like 1,440, that's a good size sample. It's definitely better than 20. All right, so you pick a good size sample and you get some data. We would expect our data to be close to that. No, it's not going to be perfect, but close. And that's where we get to our definitions of margin of error. So the margin of error has an actual definition, and I'm going to type it so you can actually read it. So our margin of error is the allowable difference from the estimate, and it determines the width of the interval. So the estimate is generally the percentage that you're given. So in our last example, the 37% like blue, that's our estimate. And the margin of error allows us, plus or minus. So when you hear people say, I need $30 plus or minus 5, well, that would be 25 to 35, right? It gives you kind of an interval. So the confidence interval, it's simply an interval, obviously, because that's in it, and that's based on the estimate and margin of error. Margin of error. For our particular class, we are only playing with 95% confidence intervals. Okay, for our class only. In the real world of statistics, you can have any percent confidence interval you want, but we are not a statistics class. We are quantitative reasoning, and therefore we are focusing only on 95%, and we are dealing with very much an estimate with this. So please don't get in an argument with somebody in a stats class and talk about confidence intervals, because they are doing it way more specific, right? We are dealing with an estimate only with 95% confidence intervals. Okay, just getting that out there. So how do we find the margin of error? Well, we have a very, very simple formula, and it is found by taking 1 divided by the square root of n. What? Well, the n is our sample size. Why they chose n, I don't know. I don't make it up, I just use it. Right? So sample size is the size of your sample. So if you talk to 4,000 people, then your sample size is 4,000. If you talk to 22, then your sample size is 22. All right, so we will use this and we will see how it works. Now, I always like to talk about the real formula. So the real formula to find your margin of error is the z-score of alpha divided by 2 times the square root of the point estimate p hat 1 minus p hat all over n, right? This is the real formula, and you're like, what the what? Exactly. We're not dealing with the real formula. See how it's an estimate, right? Estimate. This is an estimate. I just want to make sure you're aware of that. Okay, so let's go back to what we did earlier. 37% of the 1,440 adults in Indiana like blue. Calculate the margin of error. Okay, so it's a two-part problem. Let's do the margin of error first. So I know the margin of error is 1 over the square root of n. Notice how my sample size is 1440. So I get 1 over the square root of 1440. So when you do that, you should get 0.026. All right? I do believe that Blackboard talks about everything in terms of decimals. So you would have to change the 37% to decimals. But in this video, we play with percents. So this is a 2.6% margin of error. You want to super make sure that you take the square root of 1440 first and then hit 1 divided by that. Just make sure you got the 0.026. So this is the margin of error. That's the first part. The second part is the 95% confidence interval. 95%. So we would take our 37%, and to go to the left, we would subtract 2.6, and to go to the right, we would add 2.6. So if you take 37 and you subtract 2.6, you get 34.4%. And then you would add 2.6, you get 39.6%. And this would be our 95% confidence interval. So we can be 95% confident that that would be the percentage of adults in Indiana who like blue, right? 37%, give or take 2.6%. Next one, if 23% of 40 students in Warsaw, Ivy Tech, whoa, look at that misspell, prefer math over English, what's the margin of error? And then create a confidence interval. Try this. So go ahead and try this one and then come back and check it out. Okay, so the first part is the margin of error. So we'll take 1 over the square root of 40, and we get a 0.158 margin of error, which we know to be 15.8%. Very large compared to the last one. Notice how large sample, small margin of error. Small sample, large margin of error. See how that works? Okay, so here's my margin of error. And now we need to find our confidence interval. So I take my 23%, and going to the left, I subtract 15.8, and going to the right, I add 15.8. And that would give me 7.2% to 38.8%. Now in Blackboard, if you need to do decimals, you would have 0.072 to 0.388, right? That would be your interval. Just change your percent to a decimal, right? 2 decimal places. All right. So now we are going to get to kind of a whole problem. So I have a national survey asked, and this is made up data completely. A national survey asked 3,300 adults how they felt about Monday Night Football. That's fitting since I'm watching Monday Night Football right now. 62% gave Monday Night Football a favorable rating. So first of all, what is the population? Remember, population has the word all in it. And I'm talking about adults. So all adults. The sample is where we get to the number. So 3,300 adults. Margin of error. Well, the margin of error is found by taking 1 over the square root of n N is the sample size, so the square root of 3,300. This is a fairly large sample size, so I would expect a smaller margin of error, and that makes sense, 0.0174. So the 0.0174, if we change that to a percent, I get 1.74%, right? Either one of these would be fine for the margin of error. Then we go, what's the 95% confidence interval? Well, if you recall, the estimate was 62%, right? Yes, 62% is our estimate. So we've got 62%, and we're going plus or minus 1.74%. So if I subtract 1.74, I get 60.26% to 63.74%, right? I subtract it to go to the left, I add it going to the right. And now check out the sentence, because the sentence is super important. I always think of this as a Mad Libs. Okay? So we always start with, we are 95% confident. Always. Because that's the confidence interval that we're using, 95%. We are 95% confident that, and we throw in our interval, 60.26% to 63.74%. Then we go to the population. Who are we talking about? Of adults. Well, you could say of all adults, but of adults. And then what are they doing? Well, they, of adults, will give Monday Night Football a favorable rating. So it's very much Mad Libs. Every one of them will start, we are 95% confident. Then you throw in your confidence interval. Then who are you talking about and what are they doing? So you kind of want to answer the questions of, the who, what, where, when, how. Throw them all in your sentence. Okay, the next problem, I want you to try this one. Answering the same basic 5 questions, population, sample, margin of error, confidence interval, and meaningful sentence, using, in a survey of 300 mothers in Allen County, 86% of them say they are happy in their current living situation. Again, totally made up data. All right, so you're trying it, you're coming back. So the population is all mothers in Allen County. Again, details, be specific. Sample gives us the number, 300 mothers in Allen County. Margin of error, 1 over the square root of n. My sample size is 300. 300 is a medium, right? It's not small, it's not 20, it's not 40, but it's not 4,000. So we would expect a medium range margin of error, and I get 0.0557, which is 5.77%. Right? It's not small, but it's not big. It's medium size. And just for reference, our estimate is 86%. So when I go for my confidence interval, I have 86%, and I'm going to add and subtract my 5.77% margin of error. So when I subtract it, I get 80.23%, and when I add it, I get 91.77%. So here in orange is my confidence interval. And then for my sentence, once again, I play Mad Libs. So we are 95% confident that 80.23% through 91.77% of mothers in Allen County, and then what are they doing? They are happy with their current living situation. So you got to play Mad Libs with your sentences. And the more sentences you write, the easier it gets. And feel free to use colors if you want. It's all good. All right, so that is the margin of error worksheet. I hope you understand that. All right, thanks.